Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome to another music discussion. Haven't done this in a little minute, but I had an idea and I thought I might share it with you guys. So a little bit ago, I made a little black metal 3x3 chart. It's not nothing too fancy, but here it is right here. I will explain it a little more further in this video. But I made that to kind of be an entry level black metal listening chart, and I am aware that Luciferian Crown by Archgoat at the bottom there, that's not really an entry level pick, but that got me thinking about getting into harsher musical genres and more extreme music and more just unknown musical genres. And I'll limit to you guys straight up, I do not know every single musical genre out there. Every day I find more stuff that's more and more interesting. Just a few weeks ago, I found out about a musical genre that was like avant-garde jazz, which sounded mostly normal with normal piano chords, kind of banging. But then there was like extra noodling at the top that sounded discordant at the same time, and that was some genre that I can't remember what it was. And I'm not a music theory whiz, so I couldn't just tell you guys what it was, but it sounded kind of cool. But basically, what I'm saying here is that there's a lot of different kinds of music you can get into, and it's really tough to even limit yourself because everything's so different. But I made this chart because I thought if you go through it, you could get a pretty decent understanding of how black metal would work, and it's a good starting point. So I will discuss that further, but today I'm actually going to teach you guys some tips that work for me to get into harsher musical genres. And so I guess we'll just get into it. So my first tip for this is don't just start trying to get into more extreme music. You want to have a basis of things that you do like, and this isn't a perfect tip because I have heard about some people that have listened to tons of music and they don't like any of it, but they're super into black metal or death metal or something along that sort. Maybe it's just their personality. And music is subjective, so some people are into black metal more than other things. There are a couple musical genres that are very cult-like, not in a way that's exclusionary, but you can like them without liking other music, and that's totally okay. If you like some specific genre but not another, that is 100% fine, and I can actually agree with you a lot there, because there are some times where I feel that I won't like one genre but I will like another. But I highly recommend getting a good basis of musical knowledge first. Heck, even if it's just Instagram mucore memes, go ahead and listen to most of those. Like, get your My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy down, get your Neutral Milk Hotels, get your things that people will bring up in daily conversation. Listen to some Joy Division, listen to some Smiths, listen to some Oasis, get a good baseline going before you dive into anything extreme. Now, a good thing for this baseline is that there is some somewhat extreme music in this baseline. There are a lot of memes about Tool, and Tool is a good intro into progressive music, a lot of metal and stuff like that. And prog isn't that impenetrable of a genre. I mean, In the Court of the Crimson King is also like peak mucore, like that's at the very top, which its placement is disagreeable, at least on my at least in my opinion. I think there are other albums that I think would work better than that one, even better King Crimson albums, but it's totally a good starting point. But Tool is also a good starting point for getting into more music because it is on the more extreme side compared to these other things. There are so many mucore or just memed albums that you should listen to out there before you listen to anything else, honestly. Now, of course, before you even get into mucore or whatever, you're probably gonna have the songs you like. You're probably gonna have stuff on the radio. You're probably gonna have some club bangers that you like, or just music taste that your dad has. And I get that. I was like that a few years ago. Like, I didn't know what to do. I started with the Rolling Stones chart. I'm gonna be honest, it's not a great thing to start with. Of course, I did start with Sgt. Pepper's and Pet Sounds, which isn't actually a bad place to start. It's actually, those are both pretty solid albums, and they sort of lead you into other things, but it's very surface level and it doesn't cover a lot of sound. They're both around the same time, and there's only so much they cover that's different from each other. They are very different from each other. Pet Sounds obviously being a lot more chamber oriented with a lot more horns and a lot more interesting instrumentation behind there. And, Sgt. Pepper's is a lot more psych, not even that psych. I mean, if you heard early Pink Floyd, then that's something totally different. But you do, basically what I'm saying here is that you need a significant baseline. Just start looking at people talking about music. Just be like, hey, What's a popular album? Listen to a bunch of popular albums first before you even attempt to get into anything more extreme. And there are some things that I've mentioned before that are extreme that are very popular. A couple examples is a lot of Death Grips material. If you get into Death Grips early, you'll have a really good entry point into a lot of other stuff. For example, if you like Giving Bad People Good Ideas, the opening track off Bottomless Pit, I love that song. That was probably my favorite Death Grip song for a good amount of time. That blast beat, black metal magic. That is in so much black metal. It's a little slower in most black metal, but that is like intrinsic to black metal. The blast beat is iconic. So if you like that song, you actually probably like a lot of black metal. Also, a lot of Death Grip stuff can kind of lead you into noise territory. A lot of it can lead you into, I want to say, like power electronics and a lot more extreme, more angular type electronic genres. So as you can see, a lot of popular albums are aggressive. Of course, you're gonna get a lot of more extreme sided stuff, even a lot of more mainstream hip-hop, like a Denzel Curry with Taboo has a lot of really aggressive moments, and they work just fine to get you into a little more on the aggressive side of hip-hop before you dive into metal, which is it's a weird connection, I'm aware, but that attitude is something to be appreciated in that genre and also metal, so you can kind of translate them in a weird way. But just a good baseline to start with, actually, a lot of 90s music, Rage Against the Machine, a lot of grunge material that can actually kind of get you into nu metal, which I'm not the biggest fan of nu metal myself. It's kind of a memed genre, but there's a lot of entry points from nu metal into other genres. For example, nu metal is really closely connected to alt metal, and Iowa by Slipknot, which is an alt metal record, a lot of people have even argued that it's death metal because that album is just so abrasive and so aggressive. Now this leads me to my next topic. Before you get into anything, be aware that there is a massive difference between entry-level albums and essential listening. Essential listening you need to understand a genre fully. And if you don't understand a genre fully, that's totally fine. You don't even have to listen to anything from a genre. If you just want to skip that, just like, I understand. Like if something just doesn't sound appealing to you, you can skip it. That's totally cool. But if you want an entry-level look at a genre, that's totally fine. You could be a black metal hipster and only listen to Ulver. Of course, you're not Cult. You're not into black metal, but you're into Ulver, so you can say you kind of like black metal, that's fine by me. So the thing is, with the black metal chart I actually made, those are not 9 essential albums. That's maybe 3 or 4 essential albums. Not a lot of those are actually essential, but they are entry level. They're a lot more easy listening than, say, Blaze in the Northern Sky, which is a lot more essential than the new Oranssi Pazuzu record. But the new Oranssi Pazuzu record is a lot easier to listen to. One of my best friends back home actually listened to De Mysteries Dom Satanas, which is, in my opinion, the most essential black metal album, bar maybe Philosophem by Burzum. And his major complaint was that the production was terrible on it. And a lot of black metal has bad production. Some of it has slightly better stuff, and some of it really gets that niche little corner where that bad production gives it a massive boost, Philosophem being a chief example. But it's totally easy to just ditch the genre of black metal just because a lot of it is lo-fi. And that's another thing. If you look into death metal, maybe you hear that Cannibal Corpse is more popular than the band Death. But Death is better. That's the thing. Chuck Schuldiner is popular for a very good reason. He writes some amazing death metal, and that is a really good way to, I think, get into that genre. Of course, there's more aggressive stuff that will lead you through more death metal, and I think Death is on the less extreme side in terms of death metal. But starting somewhere, Chuck Schuldiner isn't a good way to get there. But that does bring up the idea that a lot of essential listening is entry level, and that's just kind of how it works. A lot of people treat a lot of essential listenings as entry level. Like a lot of people treat all of Dark Throne's material as both entry level and essential because they see it on an essentials chart and they listen to it and they're like, okay, now I understand. Yeah, now you understand, but it's really easy to start listening to Dark Throne and not like it because it's just not what you're used to. Of course, that does give you another way of diving into a genre, is actually the conception of a genre, where if you want to get into black metal easy, it's probably pretty easy if you start with Slayer and Venom, because they are a lot more similar to new wave of British heavy metal and thrash metal. And so they're arguably not even black metal. I mean, no one says Slayer is black metal, but a lot of people say Venom isn't black metal either, but they lead into black metal a lot better than just diving into, say, Immortal. And that's another thing with noise music. The most iconic noise album of all time is most likely Pulse Demon by Merzbow, but that album is one of the most brutal things just ever. But noise can reach so many different things. Like, noise doesn't even have to be electronic based. Noise can be instrumental. Like the first ever big electronic-ish noise album, a lot of people consider to be Metal Machine Music by Lou Reed. But that one's actually a lot harder to get into than most noise records. That's like 4 tracks and they're all really long. So there are better ways to get into noise music. I know those are essential listening for noise, but there are better entry points, and I'll get into those later. And now that leads me into my third tip. You need to understand that a lot of different genres of music you can't have the same approach to. And here's just a quick example. You can't approach folk music and jazz music the same. First of all, most jazz doesn't have vocals. Most folk does have vocals. And that's already a big divergence, where if you say, oh, dude, vocals is just such a weak instrument, you can only reach one note when you're playing it, or singing for this regard, you can say like, oh, I mean, I get the exact same feeling from jazz as I do folk, but in folk they're trying so much harder. That's not a good way to look at it. You need to understand that folk is poetry put to some relatively minimalist instrumentals, while you have jazz, which is a bit more maximalist, a lot more intensive, a lot more groove based, and it's nothing at all like folk. So you can't approach two genres the same. Of course, there are some genres out there that you can approach and they'll treat you differently. I think if you approach every black metal listen the same, you might, let's say you have 9 completely different black metal albums. Let's say one of them is Murmure by Murmure, and one of them is Blaze in the Northern Sky by Darkthrone. 2 completely different albums. Murmure is like as avant-garde as black metal can get, because it sounds like black metal, but it's like half of it's electronic and it's just mishmashed in such a weird way. Really cool sonic experience. But Blaze in the Northern Sky is lo-fi, it's raw, it's brutal, it's caveman riffs. It's totally different things. One's a lot more aggressive and one's a lot more moody. So getting to them is a little different, but they do have a lot of similar elements. So going into both would probably yield a somewhat similar result, despite the massive differences. But funnily enough, you could take a lot of black metal stuff and probably a lot of noise, and you can probably find a similar entry point, because you can find a lot of brutality in black metal, and a lot of brutality in a lot of noise listens, and a lot of spite in some stuff. Like if you get Vormir's harsh noise wall material, it's very brutal, and in fact, some of it, while it's brutal, some of it you can just kind of sink into, and a lot of that is similar in black metal. But also a lot of black metal, as you can see albums, especially like Philosophem, most of Burzum's material, some Leviathan material, and there's definitely a lot of other bands out there that have taken from these too. But they have a instrumental or like an ambient track stapled onto the end of the album, and it's kind of a really interesting way to wind it down, and that's kind of how you can accept ambient music just like you can accept a lot of black metal, depending on the mood. And that's another thing with noise music especially. You cannot approach noise music like almost any other genre. You can maybe approach noise music as like, I don't know, slam or like extreme death metal, where if you just chug along to say Pulse Demon, then you can catch that same energy, but it's still very different. A lot of noise music, you want to appreciate the textures and maybe just the BPM and just the rapid assault, or rather it's a lot more chill and you just want it to scratch the inside of your ear just right, which is a totally different approach. So before you hop into an album, especially if you just dive into a genre and you just pick a random one, you just need to sit down for a second and kind of think how you want to approach the album. And that leads me to what I just kind of mentioned. You can dive into a genre if there seems to be no entry, but you should realize that there is some stuff you can listen to beforehand. For example, if you want to dive into second wave black metal, sure, start with Burzum, start with Philosophem. I actually recommend that before anything else. But you need to realize that there is some stuff that can lead you beforehand. And this is actually how I explain how a good way to get into Death Grips, experimental hip-hop group, if you don't know. Which, disclaimer, you probably know if you watch my channel. Just everyone kind of knows Death Grips at this point. So to get into Death Grips, my best way, you want to start with the song Guillotine. It's probably their most popular song. It's even on Spotify, even though it's from the mixtape Ex-Military, which is not on Spotify. It does kind of represent a lot of their later styles, and yet it's a more electronic cut. off of the first album, which if you hear songs like Spread Eagle Across the Block or Beware, it's a lot less intense on the electronics. So that album's a very big mixed bag in that kind of regard. But Guillotine is very similar to a lot of later stuff, especially off the Money Store, where it's more hooky and it's a bit more aggressive on the electronic side. So you listen to that song and then listen to the Money Store as an album, and because that's pretty much their entry level album. So that's a way to approach that, and then you can get into the other stuff. And obviously, if you look at The Powers That Be, it's a very different album from Money Store, and you approach that album sort of after you get into that. Because if you just hop into that, you're going to think those sounds are really abrasive and just those textures are just dominating and a bit oppressive. And you're going to think the themes of On GP don't represent at all Get Got, because Get Got is so hooky, but On GP is about like killing yourself. So it's just a very big mix of emotion here. And you just got to find a way to dive in kind of better. But I will admit, sometimes you do need to realize that some genres don't really have an entry point in that genre. So to get into some genres, you do need that basis I was talking about at the beginning of the video. And what I'd say for that is, yeah, you can hop into black metal straight up. Just dive in if you really want to. It will take a few albums to get you there. There are going to be a few that you won't like. But I recommend liking some heavy metal first, like some thrash metal first. Same thing with noise. You want to like some more aggressive electronic music before you try jumping into that. Even though it is so different, you want to at least catch the feeling first. And that leads me to tip number 5. You need to realize that you won't like everything. And this is going to be kind of rare, but let's say that you might like noise music, but you don't like Pulse Demon. For some reason, you just listen to that one first. Sure, you might like some other noise records, but you should realize that this is subjective. And if you don't like an album, there is a chance that you just kind of got filtered for a minute and you need to circle back to it. Totally take your time. There have been a couple albums that I did not like at first that I listened to way later and then I came to appreciate. And most of the time it's because I started listening to them way on in my listening experience. And honestly, I just wasn't ready for them. Big example, To Be Kind by Swans. I did not like that album first time I listened to it, but I did like the new Daughters record, which you'd think are kind of similar to both post-rock. And they're both very, very aggressive records. But the droney nature of To Be Kind was just not for me when I started listening to it. But circling back around right now I have a big appreciation for Swans after listening to other things. And you know what? I might not even listen to Be Kind ever again, but I do realize that I understand a lot of Swans material a lot better now. So totally circle back if you don't like something at first, but do understand that you probably won't like everything just in case. For example, I'm not super huge on Emperor right now, but that's the hipster, like 101 best black metal band, which I mean, I disagree, but some people love them more than me. Of course, I'm going to give them another shot, but I just got to realize that I won't like everything. But just because you don't like one album doesn't mean you're going to hate the genre. Of course, if you listen to, say, like a new metal album and you hate it, like you hate everything about it, like let's say you listen to a Limp Bizkit album and you hate everything about it, well, you can say that's true, but you still should try a couple other albums. Try maybe a Linkin Park album, try maybe a Korn album. And the thing is, that's a little weird if you don't like anything about it, because the guitar work on Limp Bizkit is actually pretty good. But still, just give a couple other albums a shot. And this especially works for noise music, because noise music can mean so many different things. There's organic noise music where you got actual instruments, and there's noise music with electronics. And some, like Pulse Demon, are very, very aggressive. And others, like Sine Wave Solo by Sachiko M, a lot more laid back, a lot more minimalist, because that's like one sound at a time, and it's just kind of more of a slower pace, and it's just trying to scratch a part of your ear that you're gonna like a lot. And this leads me to tip number 6. It's kind of a tip, kind of not. I'm gonna give you some recommendations for some entry-level stuff into these genres. So let's say you want to get into black metal, death metal, grindcore, any subgenre of extreme metal. First of all, start off with the father of these extreme genres, thrash metal. You want to start with some thrash metal. Listen to some Megadeth. Listen to Metallica's first album, probably. Listen to Rain and Blood back there. And if you like those, then black metal is going to be easy for you. I mean, Rain and Blood back there is a lot more hooky based than a lot of black metal, and a lot of black metal is in other languages, so understanding that is going to be a little bit more difficult. But you want that aggressive style before you approach these. And of course, you might not like those yet, so maybe start with some Black Sabbath, start with some Deep Purple, some Led Zeppelin. get into some stuff that your dad likes, and that'll help you get into metal overall. And I'm totally aware. Black Sabbath is a far cry from Inquisition, but you just gotta realize that there is always a point way, way back. But just a couple specific recs here. Death metal, totally start with some death material. I actually got into death metal because I was into progressive rock, and on Mew, someone posted Symbolic, the Death album, as a prog album, because technically it is. And if you can't get into more metal like that, totally get into some Mastodon after some Tool. Tool is a good starting place for metal as well. And I know it's nothing like death metal, but if you like Tool enough, then you'll probably like Mastodon. And if you like more Mastodon material, so listen to probably like Crack the Sky, and then you can get into Leviathan, and then you can get into Blood Mountain. And when you're into Blood Mountain, there's a good chance you'll be able to get into death metal at that point. And if you get into death metal, you can probably get into black metal. If I do understand that the genres are different, but that's something totally different. And then after that point, you can just kind of just look at some generic recommendations for grindcore, maybe even get into gore grind if you're really feeling it. Personally, I'm not a big fan of slam metal, so I wouldn't really give you any recommendations for that. But there's some stuff like Suffocation. You can just start with some earlier points in that genre. And also, I've been discussing noise music a lot in this video. Noise music has a reputation for being impenetrable. Don't dive into Vormir. Don't look up that French musician who makes harsh noise wall. You're not going to like it at the beginning. And don't listen to Pulse Demon before anything else. There are videos of people reacting to Pulse Demon and they hate it. And that's totally easy to see why. It is a hard album to get into. Start with something else. Sine Wave Solo by Sachiko M. Great noise record. I actually listened to it last year for my 2020 albums because on Spotify it's listed as a 2020 album. It's not a 2020 album. It's from actually, I think, the 90s, but still a great place to start for noise music. And also, I'm aware Merzbow is probably the most iconic noise artist of all time. So listen to Merzbeat. Merzbeat is a pretty common and pretty popular recommended album on Spotify, and a lot of people say it's not as good as Pulse Demon. A lot of people give it more like an 8 out of 10 rather than Pulse Demon's acclaimed status, but that's a lot more of an approachable album because there's an actually drum machine behind it, and the sounds are a lot more tangible and a lot more recognizable because I think they're more sample based. There's also someone out there who ranked every single Merzbow release. I recommend looking him up, scrolling all the way to the bottom, maybe looking at the top 40, and he does recommend, or she, sorry, does recommend some entry-level albums to get yourself started for Merzbow, because a lot of the stuff is hard to get into. I'm totally aware of that. And also, my little black metal chart here. I'm just going to give you a quick little rundown of this thing. So I separated this chart into kind of three sections. The top three are the most essential, and they're definitely the most entry level on here. They don't branch out into any specific genre, but they're pretty much the most essential stuff, and they're pretty easy to listen to. First off, Philosophem by Burzum. This is the first black metal album I ever listened to. I listened to this over probably 2 years ago at this point. But something really good about it is the riffs are repetitive, but they're very hooky at the same time. They're going to ingrain themselves in your ear really easily. And I didn't like it the first time I actually listened to it. I thought it was very interesting, but I didn't love it. But it actually took me a bit to listen to some more metal before I listened to it again, and then I gained a really deep appreciation for it. But I thought sonically it was pretty cool. Also, fair warning, the last track is 25 minutes long, and it is very repetitive dungeon synth. If you don't like it, understandable. Not everyone likes it. The next album up there is Over. It's their debut record, and that album actually has a lot of singing to it, and that's probably a lot why people like it a bunch. It also has a lot more of a clean sort of style to it. It's not as dirty, not nearly as lo-fi, so a lot of people appreciate it a lot as an entry-level pick. A lot of people treat it as a hipster pick, but it's totally viable. That other album up there is Immortals at the Heart of Winter. I did a full review of this album in my Classics December video I did all the way back last year, but the reason I think this is a really good entry-level pick is that it has a lot of elements of German thrash to it. So if you want more technical skill behind it, if you like maybe like power metal, then you're gonna like this album, most likely. It's just a more aggressive style, but it's a pretty good place to start because the riffs are awesome, the vocals are great, the atmosphere is perfect. It's just a great place to start. So that's some three pretty early essential listens for black metal. So those three are essential. The rest of the six here get less and less essential, but are a bit more entry level into different genres. So this next album is Mistar and Kinsey by Oranssi Pazuzu. This is a post black metal album. And I mean a straight up post black metal album. It's not black gaze, nothing like that. But it's got a lot of electronic sort of soundscapes going for it. And it's got a lot of post rock style builds. And I think they're all very effective. This album is very haunting. And it's something that I can appreciate a lot in that style. If you want some black metal that's atmospheric in the way it's haunting rather than maybe chilling or spiteful, or just caveman aggression, like some Dark Throne stuff, this is a good album to listen to. And it came out last year, so if you want to have a bit of kudos and be like, hey, last year a really good album was Mastar and Kinsey, you can totally mention this one too. Next, we got the 10th sublevel of Suicide by Leviathan. I mentioned this on my Black Metal Essentials video, saying that it probably should have been on there. I still kind of believe that's true. Leviathan is probably one of the biggest American black metal bands, and that's for good reason. This is a dive into depressive suicidal black metal, a genre that is heavily criticized by black metal communities for being maybe too lenient to black gaze or doom metal, but I think that's kind of BS because this album is pretty awesome. It's very chilling, the atmosphere is perfect, and that guy is awesome. He makes a lot of good material. And next we got Summonings with Doom We Come. Now, if you like Summoning, you're probably like, Duke, what are you doing? I totally recommend one of their other albums, one of their earlier stuff, maybe like Minas Morgul, or like Cirith Ungol. I don't know. They're all Lord of the Rings names. I mean, I love Lord of the Rings, but I can't remember half those albums' names. But with Doom We Come is very different. Well, a lot of those albums were hard for me to get into myself because they had these synth soundscapes that when the vocals actually dropped out, they weren't nearly as appealing. And I think Stronghold is a pretty decent album. I was really close to loving that album, but just the sounds behind it just didn't appeal to me all that much. I actually think With Doom We Come is a good entry into this really heavy symphonic style of black metal that a lot of bands don't approach that much anymore. But I like this album a lot because it's a lot more guitar focused rather than synths, and the drums sound a bit more organic to me. And I mean, I know they use a drum machine, but I like this album a lot actually because it sounds really good. It's just a good place to start for Summoning. And I know someone's out there is going to be like, Duke, that's not the one to pick. I think it's a perfectly serviceable album, and it's a good way to enter into a band that's just super avant-garde compared to other black metal bands. This next album is Mgła from Poland's Exercises in Futility. This is an album that is actually coined as black and death metal by some people out there. I think Wyatt X Him called it black and death. I don't really think so, but it kind of is leading the way for this new style of black metal with sort of these mid-pitched riffs and a little bit cleaner production. That's a good way to show off kind of what more modern black metal is starting to sound like. A lot of modern black metal is just kind of early 2000s, late 90s worship, just trying to be Burzum or Emperor again, which, I mean, is totally fine and serviceable and all, but Mgła is kind of leading the way as being one of the more popular groups with this new style. And Exercises in Futility is an awesome album. Personally, I actually like their newest 2019 album a bit more, which is just another reason why I love the 2019 for a year of music. But that album's great. It's definitely more essential in their discography. A lot of people would actually recommend With Hearts Towards None more, but I think Exercise in Futility is great. This next album is Luciferian Crown by Archgoat. This is a war metal album. Now, war metal is a tough genre to get into. I was into black metal and I listened to Blasphemy and I didn't like it because it's so raw and caveman-like that it's just impenetrable. There's not a lot to like about it from like another point of view, and I couldn't just detach from that point of view. But Luciferian Crown is a lot cleaner. The riffs are brutal. The atmosphere is still kind of there. For a war metal record, it's a little different from how maybe Blasphemy's originally done it. And I like it a lot, actually. It's really good stuff. So I think it's actually a really good place to start. And it also gives you a little glimpse into the Finnish scene. And this last album on this chart is Woods of Desolation's Torn Beyond Reason. I talked about this in my Black Gaze video. That audio in that video is bad. I dislike that video a lot, but I wanted to mention this album because it's sort of an entry into black gaze that isn't Sunbather. Everyone talks about Sunbather, but this album is awesome. I love the vocals on it. They're just given the right amount of reverb. It's just really good stuff. But that's my little black metal chart explained. So guys, last thing I want to say before I end this video is that just remember, you won't like everything. If you want to just dip out of a genre after listening to like 3 or 4 albums, totally go ahead and do it. I totally understand. That is easy to do. There are some times where you just try too hard to get into a genre, whether it's to impress somebody or to sound patrician. Just don't even bother. If you need to listen to something sound patrician, then you're kind of approaching this the wrong way because you really want a good baseline before you get into anything else. And just remember, there's entry level picks that aren't essential that some people won't even know. So you can approach it from that angle and still be patrician, but people might not even know that you're listening to entry level music anyway. But reminder, you won't like everything. Don't be too fed up if you're just not clicking with an album. Just totally give it a skip, come back to it way later, or just forget about it because you got other stuff to listen to. And that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Did I'd appreciate it, like and subscribe. It's a little longer than I thought it would be, but some tips that need to be said. If you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, or want to talk about anything at all, go ahead and comment down below, or my social media will be in the description, and I'd love to talk to you guys there. And that's about it. So I hope to see you guys next time, and hope you guys are having a good day out there. Have a good one. Bye.